This is Norway, the world's fifth richest country, which shares borders with Sweden, Finland, and Russia just above the North Sea. It's so wealthy that 25% of its population are millionaires. It is also the world's seventh healthiest country and most democratic nation. No other country tops Norway in any indicators used to measure a country's prosperity. But it hasn't always been like this in Norway. The end of the 18th century. When famous economist Thomas Malthus visited snow-covered Norway, he saw a country where people could barely feed themselves through farming. He observed a mountainous nation where traveling was almost impossible. The cities were isolated and far away from each other, and the citizens were hardly educated. The country had 6 months of winter, which made agriculture a challenging task, and its people had a hard time securing food for themselves. Just a few years after Malthus left Norway, the situation in the country got worse. Norway's economy was completely destroyed, famine spread throughout the country, and it seemed that poverty would be Norway's fate. So, how did such a big change happen? These are all the countries that have 85% of the world's oil reserves. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, Libya, Russia, and Venezuela. But their combined GDP is complete. Only 8% of the world's GDP, and none of these countries make it to the list of the top 10 richest countries in the world. On the other hand, Norway has 13 largest producing countries in the world, but it is the fourth best country in the world in terms of quality of life. Then, what is the reason that these countries are not even close to Norway in living standards despite producing so much oil? The problem with oil is that when it's found, money starts flowing into nations rapidly. But the leaders of these nations use the wealth to reduce taxes and hike expenditures. The oil industry overshadows the rest of the industries in these countries. When these nations export more oil, their local currencies' demand increases, making it easy for the citizens to buy imported products. Consequently, the local industry of these countries starts declining. When local businesses shut down, unemployment surges and wealth gets concentrated into the hands of a few individuals, causing widespread resentment that eventually leads to protests and sometimes violent uprisings. This occurred in Libya and Venezuela. But why didn't Norway face the same oil curse? Originally, in the 19th century, Norway's entire economy was driven by maritime trade. Owing to its favorable port location, Norway could ship timber, fish, and various minerals. These goods were exported to countries in Europe and Asia. By the early 1900s, Norway had established the world's largest merchant fleet. As a result, Norway controlled about 30% of Northern Sea's sea trade. At the same time, the biggest task that the Norwegian did was to create a parliamentary system, the main purpose of which was that political power and money should not go into the hands of any one industrialist or party. Norway also had another fever from nature, and that was. But at that time, 75% of Norway's hydropower generation companies were foreign, and this was a big problem for the Norwegian government. They finally decided that Norway's natural resources would be owned only by Norwegians. In this regard, in 1940, the Norwegian government passed a bill in which foreign companies were barred from ownership of hydropower projects. With the work of the modern system, the Norwegian local industry also got a much-needed boost. Norway's GDP growth from 1945 to 1970 was 3.3% in Norway, but the bulk of the tax was spent on government education, people's welfare, and supporting the local industry. Until 1965, unemployment in Norway was negligible. Norway was now at par with the rest of Europe, but it was still not at the level it is today. But all this was about to change finally. In 1959, reserves of natural gas were found in the Netherlands, and speculations began that there might be oil reserves under the North Sea. In 1966, a company named Felipe Petroleum began drilling in the North Sea to find oil. Despite drilling for nearly 2 years, no oil reserve was found. Everyone was disappointed. Philips Petroleum decided to try one last time and began full deep drilling. And finally, in 1969, large oil reserves were found under the North Sea. In less than a decade, Norway's oil production increased more than any other country in the world. The oil sector began to create thousands of jobs. Fishing towns had now become petroleum powerhouses. Billions of dollars began to be generated, and the fate of Norway changed. But this also happened with the Middle Eastern countries, so what made Norway different? The Norwegian government had already passed a bill that natural resources shall not be controlled by any single party or enterprise, and all income will be spent only on the welfare of the people. All profits from oil started to be spent on infrastructure and education. Norway, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, could have reduced taxes, but it did not. Rather, after collecting taxes, they are back to the people. The Norwegian government created a pension fund in 1990 with the sole purpose of to invest in companies other than oil in Norway. The biggest advantage of this was that the rest of Norway's local industries also started to flirt. As a result, these employments began to fall further. Norway's dependency on the oil sector ended. Timber, paper metals and other minerals are also leading Norway in the world. Many other countries still have it today, but they are Norway's success replicate. We could not differentiate between real democracy's long-term planning and its own nation. If we all talk about the continent of being a sensation with India, then maybe India and Pakistan will be luckier than Norway in natural resources but political entity. Due to short-term planning, corruption and lack of focus on education, both today, the country is suffering from severe social and political issues. If you like this video, then like it and subscribe to the channel. And since we have to make videos on many interesting topics right now, your support is very important.